The phone buzzed, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Alex, her husband of 8 years. But it wasn't what she expected. Her thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating for a moment. Something about it felt off. With a deep breath, she unlocked the phone and opened the message. Her world unraveled in an instant. The words stared back at her with cruel clarity. "I never meant for it to happen, but I can't stop now. I love you, Jenny." Jenny. The name hit her like a freight train. Jenny was her best friend. The person she trusted more than anyone. The person she had confided in, laughed with, and cried with for years. The one person who should have had her back, not destroyed everything she held dear. And now, she realized with horrifying clarity, the two most important people in her life had been lying to her the entire time. For a moment, everything stopped. The noise in her head, the buzzing of her phone, the distant sounds of Emily, her daughter, playing in the other room, it all faded into silence. Sarah stood frozen, clutching the phone, her breath shallow, her mind a blur. How long had this been happening? How many lies had they told her? She couldn't wrap her mind around it. She had always been so sure of them, so certain that Alex was the man she married, the man who loved her. Jenny, her closest friend, had been her support system, always there through thick and thin. But this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a nightmare. Her fingers trembled as she read the message again, then scrolled back to the previous texts between Alex and Jenny. Each one more intimate, more damning than the last. The way they spoke to each other, the way they laughed at inside jokes, the way they made plans together without her. She felt sick. Her chest ached with the weight of their deceit. For the first time in years, Sarah felt truly alone. The silence in the house felt suffocating now. She looked up at the kitchen, where Emily was playing with her dolls, completely unaware of the storm raging inside her mother's heart. Sarah took a step toward her daughter, but it was as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. How could she protect Emily from this world of lies? How could she keep the facade of a happy family intact when everything around her was falling apart? She walked back into the living room, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and betrayal. Her mind replayed the moments she had shared with Alex and Jenny in the past few months. How had she missed the signs? The long hours Alex had been spending at work, the late-night phone calls that seemed to always go unanswered, the way Jenny had become more distant, more evasive. But she had never suspected this. She had trusted them both completely. And now she couldn't unsee what she had just discovered. "Sarah?" Emily's voice called out, breaking through her thoughts. "Are you okay?" Sarah turned to face her daughter, forcing a smile, though it felt foreign. "Yeah, sweetie. I'm fine." But inside, nothing felt fine. Her whole world had shattered. She couldn't stop the tears that welled up in her eyes. How had everything gone so wrong? She thought back to when they first met Alex, the charming, sweet guy who had made her feel special from the start. And Jenny, always the carefree, loving friend who made everything seem easier. But now everything felt like a lie. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Alex. She stared at it for a long time before finally opening it. "Sarah, please call me. We need to talk." Talk? After everything? After this betrayal? She wanted to throw her phone across the room, to scream at the top of her lungs. How dare he? How dare they both do this to her? But instead, she did nothing. She let the phone fall to the couch and sat down beside Emily, pulling her into a tight hug. For a few moments, they sat in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on Sarah's chest. She had to make a decision. She couldn't keep living like this. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. "Mom?" Emily's voice was soft, hesitant. "Are we still going to the park?" Sarah blinked, looking down at her daughter. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't know if she could go on with the day as if nothing had happened. But she didn't want to hurt Emily more than she already had. She needed time to think. She needed space to process everything. And yet, the phone kept buzzing, reminding her that Alex was out there, desperately trying to reach her. "No, sweetie," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We're not going to the park today. I need to take care of something." Emily looked up at her, confused. But Sarah couldn't explain. Not yet. She couldn't bring herself to tell her daughter that the life they knew was over. She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the world outside. It all felt so surreal. How could everything change so quickly? How could the person she loved, the person she had built her life with, betray her in such a gut-wrenching way? Her mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. Should she confront Alex? Should she leave? Should she demand answers from Jenny? The questions swirled, but one thing was certain. This was the end of the life she had known. Her phone buzzed again. 19 calls today, each one more desperate than the last. Sarah let out a shaky breath and made a decision. She was done. She had to leave. But it wasn't just about leaving Alex. It was about reclaiming her own life, her own peace of mind. She wouldn't let this betrayal define her. Not anymore. And so, she began to pack. One bag. A few essentials. She didn't know where she was going yet, but she knew she couldn't stay here. Not in this house filled with memories of lies and broken trust. Not with the man who had promised to love her forever, only to break that promise in the cruelest way possible. As she zipped up her bag, her phone buzzed once again. But this time, she didn't look at it. She couldn't. She was leaving it all behind. She glanced down at Emily, who was now sitting quietly, her eyes wide with confusion. Sarah kneeled beside her daughter, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "We're going to be okay, sweetie," Sarah whispered, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I promise." And with that, she walked out the door. But the calls kept coming. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sarah had always thought that life, for all its twists and turns, was about the slow accumulation of moments, small victories, quiet loves, gentle routines. She had believed that the foundation of her world was solid, a sturdy house built on trust, love, and mutual respect. But the moment she closed that door behind her and stepped out into the unknown, she realized how fragile it had all been. She sat now on the small, worn couch of her temporary apartment, the one she found on the fly, a place that felt sterile and foreign compared to the home she had shared with Alex and Emily. The echo of her decision still reverberated in her chest, a dull thud of disbelief. As Emily played quietly in the corner, Sarah let her mind wander back to how it all began. Back to when she and Alex had been a different version of themselves, before the betrayals, before the heartbreak, before everything had been reduced to a message on a phone. It had been nearly a decade ago when she first met Alex. She was just 22, fresh out of college, trying to figure out where her life would take her. Her career was still in its infancy. She had just started working as a marketing assistant in a small firm, and she was living in a cramped apartment with mismatched furniture, dreaming of something more, something bigger. She wasn't looking for love when she met him, but love had come anyway. Alex had been charming. He had a warmth to him that drew people in, a confidence that made him seem larger than life. He had eyes that made her feel seen, like he understood everything about her, even before she understood it herself. Their first date had been at a small, dimly lit Italian restaurant in the city, the kind with candles on every table and menus that felt like they belonged in an old movie. "I think I'll have the lasagna," Sarah had said, smiling across the table at him, nervous but eager. Alex had grinned, his eyes twinkling. "A woman of great taste," he said, leaning in slightly, his voice low. "You know, you look just like my grandmother." Sarah had laughed at the absurdity of it, Was this a compliment or a dig? But she didn't mind. Everything he said seemed to make her feel like she was the center of his world, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe it. It had been easy. Too easy, maybe? Their relationship progressed quickly, each moment more perfect than the last. He was thoughtful and affectionate, always showing up with little surprises, flowers after a tough day, a spontaneous road trip to a place she'd always wanted to visit. There were no complications, no emotional hurdles. Everything felt easy. And then there was Jenny. Jenny had been Sarah's best friend since college. They met in a literature class, both of them too shy to speak to anyone else but each other. Sarah had always been a little reserved, but Jenny had been bold, brash in the best way, and Sarah had immediately been drawn to her energy. Jenny was everything Sarah wasn't. While Sarah preferred the quiet comfort of a good book and a glass of wine, Jenny thrived in the chaos, loud parties, spontaneous trips, constant movement. Jenny's life had always been a whirlwind, and Sarah had loved it. Jenny had a way of making everything feel exciting. And when Alex and Sarah got serious, Jenny had been there every step of the way. She had been the one to encourage Sarah to say yes when Alex proposed, even though Sarah had doubts in the back of her mind. "Trust me, you two are perfect for each other," Jenny had said, her voice unwavering, her eyes full of certainty. "He's the one." For years, Sarah had believed Jenny. She had believed everything was perfect. But now, as she sat alone in this unfamiliar apartment, she realized how naive she had been. Jenny, the person who was supposed to have her back, had known about Alex's infidelity for God knows how long. And Alex. Sarah's heart twisted in her chest. Alex had been her rock, her partner. She had built a life with him, shared dreams, and imagined a future that now seemed impossible. As she leaned back into the couch, the silence of the apartment felt heavy, like it was pressing down on her. She glanced over at Emily, who was playing with her dolls, blissfully unaware of the storm her mother was in the middle of. "Mom, can we go to the park today?" Emily asked, her voice sweet and innocent. Sarah's throat tightened. Emily's simple, childlike question reminded her of the world she had just walked away from, the world that was now shattered beyond recognition. The world that was still trying to call her back. "I don't think we can today, sweetie," Sarah replied, her voice unsteady but trying to sound as normal as possible. "We're going to have a quiet day today." Emily didn't seem to mind. She returned to her dolls, muttering to herself in a little girl's game of pretend. But Sarah's thoughts were far from quiet. Her phone buzzed again. 19 calls from Alex, the latest one coming just moments ago. She hadn't answered any of them. Alex hadn't stopped calling, but what did he think he could say? What could he say that would make this right? There were no words that could undo the damage. No excuses that would make it okay. Not when she had seen everything for what it was. She picked up her phone, staring at the screen, debating whether or not to call him back. It felt like a betrayal to herself just to entertain the thought. But at the same time, a part of her wanted to hear what he had to say. She wanted to hear the man who had promised to love her, to protect her, and now, she realized, had done the exact opposite. "I never meant for it to happen, but I can't stop now." She couldn't get those words out of her head. With a slow, deliberate motion, she set the phone down on the coffee table, ignoring the way it buzzed again almost immediately. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't live in this tangled web of lies. But the more Sarah thought about it, the more questions kept popping up. Why had Alex chosen Jenny? Why did he feel the need to hide it from her for so long? And most of all, how had she missed the signs? She considered all the little things that had seemed off. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the odd shifts in Jenny's behavior. But then, just as quickly, she pushed the thoughts away. It didn't matter now. It was too late to go back. Too late to fix things. All that mattered was moving forward. "I'm not going to let this define me," Sarah whispered under her breath, a quiet vow to herself. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew she had to find out. She had to take control. And as the phone buzzed one more time, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't answer it. Not today, not ever again. It was time to start over. She grabbed a notebook from her bag, scribbling something quickly on a blank page. I will be okay. I will rebuild. And that, for the first time since she had walked out of that house, gave her a flicker of peace. The first few days in the small apartment had felt like a blur. Sarah had been numb, her mind caught in a loop of disbelief and anger. Every day was a battle between what she knew she had to do and what she wished she could forget. Emily was adjusting, playing with her dolls in the corner, asking her the same questions over and over, oblivious to the storm that had ripped through her mother's world. But Sarah couldn't ignore it. She couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something deeper, something more sinister, had been at play for months, maybe even years. Sarah didn't have to try hard to remember the small cracks in her marriage that she had overlooked or excused. They had been there, clear as day. She had just chosen to look the other way. Now, in the silence of this apartment, the truth pressed in on her from every angle, suffocating her with the weight of what had been hiding right under her nose. It wasn't just the late nights Alex had spent working late, or the sudden, unexplained business trips that left her feeling increasingly alone. It was the little things, the subtle shifts in his behavior that she had convinced herself were normal. Or, more accurately, that she had allowed herself to believe were normal. Like when he started pulling away emotionally. At first, it had been small things, a slight tone shift when she asked about his day, a distracted glance when she was talking about something important. But she had rationalized it. He was busy. He was stressed with work. They both were. There was a child to care for, bills to pay, the usual grind of life that wore down even the most solid relationships. But then, there were moments when she saw him with Jenny. Sarah remembered a dinner at their house a few months back, a casual evening that was supposed to be a get-together. Emily had gone to bed early, and Sarah and Alex had settled on the couch with a glass of wine while Jenny stayed over, as she often did, with her latest gossip about her job or the latest drama in her life. That evening, as they laughed and joked, Sarah had caught a glimpse of something different between Alex and Jenny. The way their eyes lingered just a bit too long, the way their hands brushed against each other as they reached for the same bowl of popcorn. Sarah had brushed it off then, thinking she was reading too much into it. Jenny was just her best friend. And Alex, well, Alex was Alex. But the more she thought about it now, the more she realized that was the exact moment when everything began to shift. It was when she stopped paying attention. It was when she let herself believe that things were fine, that everything would go back to normal. But they hadn't. They never would. Sarah had tried to push it all out of her mind. She had tried to tell herself it was just a rough patch. But now, with the clarity that came with distance, the pieces fit together in a way they never had before. She could see the moments now every time Alex had looked at Jenny with that hint of something more, that look he used to give her when they were newly in love. She could see it all clearly now, each subtle detail pointing to the truth. He had been falling for Jenny for months, maybe even years, while Sarah had been blind to it, wrapped up in the mundane responsibilities of daily life. The worst part wasn't just the betrayal. It was the way they had both lied to her. It was the way Alex had kissed her goodbye each morning, telling her everything was fine, all while sneaking around behind her back. It was the way Jenny, her best friend, had pretended to be her confidant, all while secretly taking what was hers. But then again, she realized with a bitter pang, she had ignored the signs. Sarah had excused his behavior. She had excused Jenny's behavior. She had convinced herself it was just a phase, that things would work themselves out. She hadn't wanted to believe that the man she loved, the man she had built a life with, could ever hurt her like this. And Jenny. Sarah's anger boiled over when she thought of her. Her best friend, who had been there for everything. Who had comforted her during difficult times? Who had been her shoulder to cry on? But Jenny wasn't a friend. She wasn't the person Sarah thought she was. She was the one who had gone behind Sarah's back, who had shared intimate moments with the man who had sworn to love her. Sarah stood up, pacing the small apartment, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, and she couldn't sit still. She felt the pressure of all the unanswered questions weighing on her. Why had they done it? Why her? Why had Alex chosen Jenny, and why had Jenny let it happen? Was it just about the physical connection, or was there something deeper there, something Sarah would never understand? She needed answers. But more than that, she needed closure. She needed to know how long it had been going on and what exactly had happened between them. She couldn't move forward without the truth. But Sarah also knew this was about more than just uncovering the truth. It was about reclaiming her life. It was about finding herself again. She looked at Emily, who was still absorbed in her dolls, her tiny voice occasionally breaking through the silence. For a moment, the weight of it all almost brought Sarah to her knees. How could she protect Emily from this mess? How could she explain the world that was falling apart around them? But then Sarah remembered something she had always told herself: you can't pour from an empty cup. She had to take care of herself. She had to heal before she could help anyone else. Her phone buzzed again, another call from Alex. But Sarah didn't pick it up. She wasn't ready. Not yet. She walked to the small desk by the window and sat down. She grabbed a pen and started to write, the words flowing faster than she could keep up with. Why did I ignore the signs? Why didn't I see it sooner? Why didn't I trust my instincts? The questions piled up, and the anger within her flared brighter than ever. But as she wrote, something shifted. She wasn't writing to blame herself anymore. She was writing to understand, to make sense of the chaos in her life. I'm not going to let this break me. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to grow from it. Sarah sat back in the chair, staring at the words. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. And no matter what happened next, she would face it with clarity, with strength. And maybe, just maybe, she would get the answers she needed. The weight of the silence was suffocating. Sarah sat by the window, staring out into the city below. The cold morning light filtered through the blinds, casting thin slivers of shadow across the room. Emily had long since gone to bed, and the apartment was eerily still, the ticking of the clock on the wall the only sound that filled the space. It had been a week since she left. A week since she'd walked out on Alex, since she had thrown everything she thought she knew about her life into the wind. And yet, the question still hung in the air, unresolved and taunting. Why? It wasn't enough to know that Alex had betrayed her. It wasn't enough to know that Jenny had been complicit in it. She needed to hear it from them. She needed to confront them both face to face so she could finally understand the depth of their lies. Sarah knew this moment was inevitable. She had avoided it long enough, hiding behind the fragile walls of the apartment and the safety of unanswered calls. But the truth was, she needed closure. She needed to know that she wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She needed to know that the people she loved, the people she trusted, had not been laughing behind her back, mocking her the entire time. That night, she called Alex. The phone rang once, twice, a third time. Sarah? His voice crackled through the receiver, full of desperation, the kind of desperation that Sarah had never heard before. The kind that made her stomach twist into knots. Where are you? I've been trying to reach you. Please, I need to talk to you. Sarah's breath hitched, but she held firm. No matter how much she wanted to hear him beg, to hear him explain himself, she wasn't going to give in this time. Not before she was ready. I'm not interested in talking over the phone, Alex, she said, her voice cold but steady. I want to see you. In person. Tomorrow. We'll meet at the park. Noon. There was a long pause on the other end, and for a moment, Sarah wondered if he was going to argue, if he was going to try and convince her to change her mind. But he didn't. He just sighed, a defeated sound that seemed to echo in the pit of Sarah's stomach. "Fine," Alex said quietly. "I'll be there." The call ended with a click, and Sarah sat there, staring at her phone for a long moment. She hadn't been prepared for the wave of emotions that followed. Was she ready for this confrontation? Was she ready to hear his excuses, his justifications, his lies? What would it do to her? It wasn't about healing. Not yet. It was about answers. It was about taking back control over the situation. She had already made up her mind to leave, but this was the final piece of the puzzle. She needed to know if Alex still cared for her or if he had truly moved on, already in love with someone else. The next morning, Sarah spent the morning with Emily at the apartment. She tried to act normal, tried to smile at her daughter's antics, but inside, her mind raced. The time was coming. She had to face Alex, and she had to do it without breaking down. At noon, she left the apartment, making sure to lock the door behind her. She felt a pang of guilt as she glanced at Emily, but she knew this was something she had to do alone. The park was only a few blocks away. The air was cool, crisp with the promise of fall, but the sun was shining brightly, casting long shadows on the grass. It felt peaceful, serene, like a place where secrets were supposed to be buried. Alex was already there when Sarah arrived, standing near the entrance, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. His face looked gaunt, the tiredness that had crept in over the last few days etched into his features. He looked older, worn. Not the man Sarah had fallen in love with, but a stranger, someone who had let everything slip away from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, locked in the silence that had defined their relationship for weeks, months, maybe even years. Finally, Alex broke the quiet. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I never meant for things to get this far. I never meant to hurt you." Sarah fought the urge to scream at him. She wanted to lash out, to tell him everything she had been holding in for the past week. But she didn't. Instead, she crossed her arms over her chest, trying to contain the whirlwind of emotion inside. "You never meant to hurt me?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with incredulity. "Is that supposed to make it better, Alex? Is that supposed to make the fact that you've been sleeping with my best friend somehow okay?" His eyes flickered, guilt washing over his face. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. "Answer me, Alex," Sarah pressed. "How long? How long have you been doing this? How long have you been lying to me? How long have you been?" 2 years, he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's been going on for 2 years. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I never meant for it to happen. It just did. 2 years. The weight of the revelation hit her like a punch to the gut. It had been going on for that long. 2 years of her life, her marriage, a lie. Sarah's eyes burned with unshed tears. She wanted to scream, to run, to get as far away from him as possible. But she stayed. She needed to hear this. She needed to understand. "How?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How could you do this to me? To us?" Alex took a step toward her, but Sarah took an instinctive step back. She couldn't bear to have him close. "Not right now." "I don't know," he said softly. I just fell for her. And I couldn't stop. I didn't want to hurt you, but I did. And now I'm paying for it. Losing you, it's the hardest thing I've ever had to face." Sarah's heart hardened as she looked at him. This was the man she had loved. This was the man she had shared her life with. But now all she saw was someone who had betrayed her in the most cruel and heart-wrenching way possible. "You're right," she said quietly, her words sharp as knives. "You are losing me, Alex. Because I'm done. I'm done with all of this." She turned to leave, but Alex reached out, grabbing her arm gently. "Please," he pleaded. "Sarah, don't leave like this. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I'll do anything to make this right." Sarah looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face, his eyes filled with desperation. For a moment, she felt the familiar tug of the past, the life they had built together. But it wasn't enough. "I don't know who you are anymore, Alex," she whispered, pulling her arm free from his grasp. "And I don't want to." With that, she turned and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't need him to beg. She didn't need his promises of change. What she needed now was to move forward, to leave the past behind. And as she walked out of the park, the only thing that lingered in her mind was this: she was finally free. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The walk back to the apartment felt surreal, like Sarah was floating just above her own reality. The crisp air hit her face, but it did little to numb the sting of what had just transpired. The confrontation had gone as expected, though the finality of it, Alex's broken, pleading eyes as she walked away, had left an ache in her chest she hadn't anticipated. But in the silence that followed, she realized something. For the first time in what felt like years, she wasn't afraid of what was to come. She wasn't drowning in the weight of unspoken truths or lies she had been too scared to face. She was finally free. The realization didn't come with the instant relief she thought it would, but it was there, just beneath the surface, waiting to push through. She had stepped into the unknown, but the unknown wasn't as scary as she had imagined. It was a canvas, blank and waiting for her to paint her own future. By the time Sarah reached the apartment, the sun had begun to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden glow across the world outside. She let herself inside, the familiar hum of the small apartment wrapping around her, but this time, it felt different. The apartment, the space she had avoided for days, was now her sanctuary. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she froze for a moment. "Alex." Again. She didn't pick up. Instead, she sat down on the couch, the weight of the last few days beginning to sink in. What now? What did this mean for her and Emily? For the life she thought she had? She was no longer tied to the past, but she couldn't ignore the fact that there was still so much uncertainty ahead. But that was okay. She could handle it. She had to. Her thoughts drifted back to Emily, playing in the corner, blissfully unaware of the turmoil her mother had just endured. She had seen the innocence in her daughter's eyes as Sarah had walked out on Alex, and part of her had wondered if she was making the right choice. But then she thought about the future, the kind of woman she wanted Emily to see, the kind of example she wanted to set. Sarah couldn't teach Emily to stay in a broken situation. She couldn't teach her to accept betrayal and dishonesty as part of life. She wanted Emily to know that there was always a way out, a way to move forward, no matter how dark the past seemed. She stood and walked over to where Emily sat, lost in her own little world, and knelt beside her. "Hey, sweetie," Sarah said softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from Emily's face. "How about we make some cookies? What do you think?" Emily's eyes lit up, the excitement of the simple suggestion bringing a bright smile to her face. "Yes, Mommy. Can we make them with chocolate chips?" "Of course," Sarah replied, her heart swelling. It was in these small moments, these simple gestures, that she began to realize the life she was building, one she hadn't planned for but one she would fight for every single day. They spent the next hour in the kitchen, flour flying in every direction as they baked, Emily chattering away about school, her dolls, and the funny things her teacher had said that day. It was a far cry from the intense emotions Sarah had just navigated, but it was the grounding she needed. In the midst of the chaos, her daughter was her anchor. As they finished the cookies, Sarah sat down at the table, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a message from Jenny. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." Sarah stared at the message for a moment, the words twisting in her gut. She hadn't heard from Jenny since the day she'd walked away from Alex. She had expected something from her, maybe a call, maybe an apology, but not this. It was a start, but Sarah wasn't sure if she was ready to deal with it yet. Not today. Not after everything that had happened. Instead, she put the phone down, choosing to focus on Emily's giggling as she danced around the kitchen, holding up her cookie like a trophy. Sarah smiled, watching her daughter's pure joy. There was so much in this world worth fighting for. And as the night wore on, she found herself slowly rebuilding, piece by piece, the life she had once taken for granted. And she knew, deep down, that the hardest part was over. It was time for her to rediscover who she was. Without the weight of Alex's betrayal, without the shadow of Jenny's disloyalty, she was no longer defined by the past. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was from Alex. A long string of unanswered calls. But Sarah didn't care. She wasn't answering. The future was hers now. She wasn't going to let anyone, especially not Alex or Jenny, take that from her. Emily climbed into Sarah's lap, and for a moment, Sarah closed her eyes, letting the love and warmth of her daughter flood through her. She was going to be okay. They were going to be okay. She could feel the shift within herself, a quiet strength she hadn't known was there, waiting for her to find it. It was time to face whatever came next, one step at a time. And this time, Sarah knew she wouldn't be running from her future. She was going to live it, and she was going to make it her own. The morning air was different today. There was a crispness to it, something that felt both invigorating and unsettling at the same time. It wasn't just the early autumn chill that made Sarah draw her coat tighter around her, but the realization that today, her life was no longer on autopilot. She had hit a new chapter, a blank page that she had to fill, and she wasn't entirely sure where to start. But she knew she couldn't stay in this apartment forever, hiding from the world. She couldn't keep running from the truth. She had to step forward. Emily was still asleep, tangled in her blanket, her face peaceful and serene in the quiet of the morning. Sarah couldn't help but watch her for a few minutes, the knot in her chest tightening. She had made the right decision for them both, hadn't she? As much as she wanted to bury herself in the safety of these four walls, she couldn't. Not anymore. Not if she was going to truly rebuild. Sarah's phone sat on the counter where she'd left it the night before. It had been silent for the last few hours, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a strange calm in the absence of messages and missed calls. The world hadn't come crashing down. She wasn't running on a hamster wheel of constant demands. There was space to breathe, to think, to reimagine what her life could look like without the shadows of betrayal looming over her. The phone buzzed again. Her heart skipped a beat before she checked the screen. Alex. The text was brief, but the weight of it hit her harder than she expected. Please just talk to me. I'm sorry. I know I messed up. But I love you, Sarah. Please. The words felt like a slap in the face, even though she had prepared herself for them. He was sorry. He loved her. But was it enough? Could it ever be enough? She stared at the message for a long moment, biting her lip. It was tempting to reply. It was tempting to fall back into the comfort of the past, the familiar words that once made her feel safe. But she knew better now. She had learned too much, seen too much, to go back. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was from Jenny. Sarah, I can't apologize enough. I wish there was something I could say to make this right. I never meant for it to end like this. Please call me. There was the familiar sting of betrayal in those words, but also something else, a sense of desperation. Jenny's message was different from Alex's. She wasn't asking for Sarah's forgiveness outright. She was asking for a conversation, for an opportunity to explain herself. But Sarah didn't want explanations anymore. She didn't need their justifications. They had both made their choices. And so had she. Sarah took a deep breath, setting the phone down gently on the counter. She didn't need to reply. She didn't need to go down that road again. Instead, she decided, in that moment, that she would choose to move forward, not backward. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she just silenced it, putting it face down and walked into the kitchen. She had a new purpose now. The apartment felt quieter than ever. The morning light filtered in through the windows, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly across the floor. Sarah picked up the phone again, but this time, it wasn't for Alex or Jenny. This time, she had a different kind of message to send. It was time to start over. And to do that, she had to rebuild everything, piece by piece. She stood in front of the window and stared out at the world beyond, the city moving at its own rhythm, unaware of the quiet revolution happening just a few floors above. There was a world of opportunity out there, untouched by the past, untainted by the lies. Sarah thought about Emily, and her heart swelled with love. Emily deserved a mother who was whole. She deserved a future that wasn't marred by the kind of dishonesty Sarah had accepted for so long. She deserved to see her mother happy again, standing tall and proud of who she was. Sarah wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for Emily too. And if there was one thing Sarah had learned over the past week, it was that fighting for your own happiness was the most important thing you could do. For your daughter, for yourself, for the future. She would never again let anyone define her life. No more waiting for a broken man or a disloyal friend to fix the pieces. She had to fix them herself. By the time Emily woke up, Sarah had already put the first part of her plan into motion. She had sent out her resume to a few companies, even started drafting ideas for a blog that she had always dreamed of writing. A blog about strength, resilience, and starting over. It felt good to take action, to know that she was no longer waiting for someone else to make her life work. But the reality of her new life had already set in. There was no going back. She was walking away from the past, step by step, without looking over her shoulder. When Emily finally woke up, Sarah had already made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and she sat with her daughter at the kitchen table, their quiet chatter filling the space. The past week had been a whirlwind of emotions, but today felt different. Today felt like the beginning of something new. She smiled at Emily, the weight of everything she had just gone through beginning to feel lighter. "Mommy, are we going to the park today?" Emily asked, her face lighting up with the kind of hope that only a child could possess. Sarah's heart ached for a moment. She wanted so badly to give Emily everything she needed, to show her that the world was still a safe place even after everything had changed. "Maybe tomorrow, sweetie," Sarah said with a smile. "But today, we have some things to do, okay?" Emily nodded, taking a bite of her toast, her small hands smeared with jelly. Sarah watched her for a moment, a quiet certainty settling in her chest. She was going to be okay. They were going to be okay. For the first time in years, Sarah didn't feel like she was standing still. She wasn't stuck in a marriage that had fallen apart or a friendship that had betrayed her. She was moving forward, and that was all that mattered. The past was behind her. The future was waiting. And this time, Sarah was ready to embrace it. The days had begun to blend together, and yet, Sarah felt more alive than she had in years. There was something liberating about the quiet that had settled in her life since the confrontation with Alex. The phone no longer buzzed incessantly with apologies and pleas for forgiveness. In its place, there was a newfound peace that hung in the air like the scent of rain after a dry spell. But it wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments when the weight of what had happened threatened to pull her under, moments when her heart would flutter with unease at the thought of Alex or Jenny or the life they had built together. She had tried her best to shield Emily from the emotional turmoil, to keep the home life as normal as possible. But the truth was, things were different now. The apartment, once shared with Alex, felt like a hollow echo of what it had been. The warmth and laughter that had filled these walls now seemed muted, replaced by the quiet hum of routine and the absence of another voice. It was hard not to feel the absence of a partner when there had once been someone to share the weight of responsibility, the triumphs, and even the mundane moments. But then, a small voice would remind her, "You're not alone, Sarah." Emily. Emily was her anchor. Still, that didn't make the loneliness any easier to bear. One night, as Sarah sat on the couch, typing out an email for a freelance project she had been offered, the phone buzzed again. She had learned to ignore it, at least, that's what she told herself. But this time, it wasn't from Alex. It wasn't even from Jenny. It was from a number she didn't recognize. Curious, Sarah opened the message. "We need to talk. I know what happened. I have the truth." Her heart stopped for a moment. She stared at the message, reading it again, just to make sure she wasn't imagining it. The words were vague, unsettling in their ambiguity. Who was this? Who knew the truth? And why would they reach out now, after all this time? She felt a wave of nausea roll through her. It wasn't just that someone else knew what had happened between her and Alex. It was that the message made it clear there were still things in her life that were unresolved. Secrets, hidden truths she hadn't uncovered yet. And it terrified her. For a moment, Sarah debated whether or not to respond. She didn't want to open up old wounds. She didn't want to dive back into that world, a world of betrayal and deceit that had already taken so much from her. But the curiosity gnawed at her, relentless and impossible to ignore. She took a deep breath and, despite her better judgment, typed a response. "Who is this? What do you know?" There was a long pause before the reply came. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a video link. Her heart pounded in her chest as she clicked it. The video opened with a shaky camera shot, as if someone had recorded it on the move, but it was clear enough to see the familiar surroundings of Alex's apartment. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't just some random message. This was someone who had been there, in the heart of it all. A man's voice spoke, and Sarah instantly recognized it. "Sarah, I'm sorry. This wasn't supposed to happen like this, but you need to know the truth. Everything Alex has told you, it's a lie." The man paused, and Sarah could hear the rustling of someone moving behind the camera. "I didn't want to get involved, but I can't let you keep living this lie. There's more to the story than you know. More than Alex will ever admit." Her hand shook as she held the phone. What was happening? Who was this man? And what did he mean, more to the story? The video cut abruptly, and Sarah was left staring at a blank screen, her heart hammering in her chest. Her mind raced. Could it be someone Alex had known? A friend, a colleague, someone else who had witnessed the lies unfolding? Had Alex told someone else the truth, or was this a fabrication? She looked down at the phone in her hand, the message still sitting in her inbox, taunting her. She didn't know what to make of it, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something vital being kept from her. Some part of the puzzle that Alex, Jenny, and even her own mind had carefully tucked away. This wasn't over. She sat there for a long time, her thoughts spinning. The message had shattered the fragile sense of control she had spent days building. It had opened a door that she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. But if there was something more to know, something she hadn't yet uncovered, she had to find out. The truth had always been elusive, hiding just beneath the surface. Now it was calling to her once more. And no matter how painful it might be, she couldn't ignore it. She needed answers. And this time, she would get them, even if it meant tearing apart everything she thought she knew. The next day, she called the number back, her heart in her throat. It rang several times before someone picked up. "Hello." A man's voice answered, heavy with an accent Sarah didn't immediately recognize. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaky but firm. "What do you know about Alex?" "About the truth." There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment, Sarah thought the call had dropped. But then the man spoke, his voice low and serious. "You have to trust me, Sarah," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to give you the pieces you've been missing. But you need to listen carefully. You need to be ready for what I'm about to tell you." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. There was something in his voice, a gravity to his words, that made her heart skip a beat. What had she gotten herself into? "I'm listening," she whispered, almost afraid to hear what he might say next. And then, just before he spoke again, there was a sudden noise, something sharp and distant, like the sound of something breaking. The man's voice faltered for a moment. "I can't explain it all right now," he said quickly. "But I promise you'll want to hear the rest. Meet me tonight, 9 p.m., at the old diner on the corner of West and Oak. I'll be there. And I'll tell you everything." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her mind racing. She had just made another choice, another step into the unknown. This wasn't over. Not yet. And the more she uncovered, the more she realized that the truth she had been searching for might be darker than she ever imagined. But she had to know. She had to understand everything. And at 9 p.m., she would face whatever waited for her in the shadows. The past was not finished with her yet. The hours between Sarah's phone call and the moment she had to meet this stranger felt like a blur, time slipping by as her mind raced with questions and half-formed thoughts. The weight of uncertainty pressed on her chest as the day wore on, the normalcy of Emily's playtime offering no relief from the nagging sense that something was about to shift again. She couldn't help but think about the strange message, the video, and the voice on the phone. Who was this man? What did he know? Was he telling the truth? And if so, what had Alex and Jenny been hiding all this time? It wasn't the first time Sarah had wondered if there were things about Alex's betrayal she still didn't know, but now, with a stranger reaching out, she felt the old questions bubbling back to the surface with an intensity she couldn't ignore. After dinner, Sarah tucked Emily into bed. The small apartment suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. Emily's soft breathing was a constant reminder of what she had left behind and what she was fighting for. "Mommy," Emily murmured as Sarah kissed her forehead. "Are you going to be okay?" Sarah smiled down at her daughter, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "I'm always okay, sweetie," she said, her voice steady despite the storm swirling in her chest. "I promise." The words were easy to say, but Sarah wasn't sure they were entirely true. She had been lying to herself for so long, convincing herself she was fine, that things would work out. But the reality was more complicated than that. Everything had shifted. She wasn't the same person she had been just a few days ago. As Sarah left the bedroom, she took a final glance at her sleeping daughter, her heart swelling with both love and fear. The world she had known had crumbled, but now there was a new path to carve out. A new identity to build. She picked up her purse, checked the time, and left the apartment. The diner was a few blocks away, the neon lights casting an eerie glow over the empty parking lot. The place was old, weathered, and looked like it had been frozen in time. It wasn't a popular spot anymore, but the quiet atmosphere was just what Sarah needed, no distractions, just answers. She stepped inside, the bell above the door ringing softly as she entered. The smell of stale coffee and greasy food hit her immediately, a sharp reminder of the place's faded charm. The diner was nearly empty except for a few scattered patrons, their heads bent low over plates of food, lost in their own worlds. At the far corner, a man sat, looking over a cup of coffee. He looked up when she entered, his gaze sharp but not unfriendly. He had dark hair, graying at the temples, and an air of quiet confidence that immediately unsettled her. "Sarah," he asked, his voice low and deliberate. She nodded, taking a hesitant step toward him. "You're the one who called." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Please sit. We need to talk." The way he said it sent a chill through her. She sat, but her mind was already reeling. This felt wrong, like she had just stepped into something much larger than herself. There was no turning back now. "I'm Daniel," the man said, taking a slow sip of his coffee. His eyes never left her face, studying her with an intensity that made Sarah uncomfortable. I know you're probably wondering what this is all about, but I'll get straight to the point. Sarah's throat felt tight, but she managed to ask, "What do you know about Alex?" "About the truth." Daniel set the coffee cup down and leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You've been lied to, Sarah. All of you have." He paused, watching for her reaction. "You, Alex, Jenny, they've all kept secrets from you. And I can't let that go on any longer." Sarah's pulse quickened. She leaned forward instinctively, her voice a whisper. "What are you talking about?" Daniel glanced around the diner, making sure no one was listening. "It's not just the affair, Sarah. It's bigger than that." He hesitated, his jaw tightening before he continued. "Alex was involved in something he shouldn't have been. Something that goes beyond just hurting you." A knot formed in Sarah's stomach. She had suspected there was more to Alex's betrayal than just the affair, but this was different. This was something deeper. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Daniel's eyes flicked to the door for a moment, scanning the room before meeting her gaze again. "I've been watching Alex for a long time. He wasn't just cheating on you, he was covering something up. Something dangerous." Sarah's mind raced. Dangerous? What was he talking about? What was Alex involved in? "Alex was involved with a group," Daniel continued, his voice dropping lower. "A group that's been running operations you don't want to know about. And Jenny, well, she was part of it too. They used you, Sarah. Used your relationship with Alex to keep their activities hidden from the people who would be asking too many questions." Sarah felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted. Her thoughts were scattered, trying to process everything he had just said. A group? Illegal activities? Jenny, are you saying that the affair was just a cover for something bigger? Sarah's voice was almost a whisper. She could hardly comprehend it. Daniel nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I'm saying. Alex has been in deep with people who have no problem getting their hands dirty. And now they've realized you know too much." Sarah felt a coldness seep into her bones. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, the words barely escaping her lips. "What do you want from me?" He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I'm not asking for anything, Sarah. I'm telling you because you need to know. If you're going to move on with your life, if you're going to keep Emily safe, you need to understand the truth. You can't keep running from it." His words hit her like a freight train, the implications of what he was saying crashing into her all at once. She was in the middle of something far bigger than she had realized, and the betrayal wasn't just about Alex's affair. It was about her safety, her daughter's safety, and the lives of people she had trusted. Sarah's mind was spinning. She hadn't come here expecting to hear this. She had just wanted answers about Alex's infidelity, about the lies that had shattered her world. But this? This was something else entirely. "Are you trying to scare me?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. Daniel's face softened, just slightly. "No, I'm telling you the truth. And now, you need to decide what you're going to do with it." Her heart raced. She had been so focused on moving on from Alex, on rebuilding her life with Emily, that she hadn't prepared for this. She had no idea what the next step was, but one thing was clear. She was tangled in something much darker than she could have ever imagined. The door to the diner opened with a jingle, and Sarah froze, her body going tense. But when she looked back at Daniel, he was already standing, his coat on, ready to leave. "I have to go," he said quietly. "But I'll be in touch. You'll need me. Trust me." With that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Sarah alone in the diner, her mind reeling. The truth was out there, but the path ahead was murky, full of shadows and unknown dangers. She had just learned that the betrayal wasn't over. It was only beginning. The next few days were a blur of confusion and fear, each one more suffocating than the last. Sarah couldn't stop replaying the conversation with Daniel in her mind, the weight of his words pressing against her chest. Alex, Jenny, and the life she thought she knew. It was all part of a web far more complicated than she had imagined. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that everything about her life had been a carefully constructed illusion. Alex's affair wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was the truth she was only beginning to uncover, the part that had remained hidden from her for so long. Her world had been built on lies. Now it was falling apart at the seams. She tried to push it aside, to focus on her daughter, on the future she was trying to rebuild, but every time she closed her eyes, the images from that meeting with Daniel replayed in vivid detail. Dangerous people, secret operations, and Alex, her husband, caught up in it all. The phone rang again. She hesitated before picking it up, the sound of her heartbeat thudding in her ears. It was an unknown number. She glanced at the screen. Could it be him again? Her hand shook slightly as she answered. Hello. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the tone was urgent. Sarah, it's me, Daniel. Her pulse quickened. What now? She demanded, trying to sound more confident than she felt. We need to meet again, Daniel said, his voice clipped, sharp. You're not safe. Alex's people, they know you're looking for answers. Fear rippled through Sarah. What do you mean? How do they know? It's not about what you know right now, it's about what you're about to uncover. They're closing in. You have to leave. You're in danger. Her stomach twisted. She had barely had time to process the weight of what Daniel had already told her, and now there was even more to fear. Her whole life, everything she'd worked for, was at risk. Where do I go? She asked, her voice quieter now. Her mind was racing, calculating the risks. But how could she protect Emily from this? How could she leave the life she'd built in such a short amount of time? Daniel gave her a quick, cold address. Pack your things. Be ready in an hour. And don't tell anyone where you're going. Before Sarah could respond, he hung up. She stood there, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Her pulse thundered in her ears, her mind spinning as she turned in a daze toward Emily's bedroom. She had no choice. She had to leave. If Daniel was right, if Alex was mixed up with people like the ones Daniel had described, her family, her daughter, was at risk. Mommy? Sarah froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Emily stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes sleepily, still in her pajamas. The sight of her innocent face, her wide, trusting eyes, made Sarah's heart ache. Sweetheart, what are you doing up? Sarah asked, trying to sound calm, though her nerves were fraying. I heard you talking on the phone. Emily's voice was soft, but there was a hint of concern. Who was that? Sarah knelt in front of her, putting a hand on her daughter's small shoulder. It was just someone I used to know, she said carefully, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. Everything's okay, Emily. I promise. But as Emily looked up at her, Sarah saw the flicker of doubt in her daughter's eyes. She couldn't protect Emily from this, not entirely. Emily was growing up, and though Sarah had tried to shield her, the truth was starting to seep through the cracks. Mommy, are we going somewhere? Emily asked, her voice small and uncertain. Sarah's heart clenched. We might be, she said, forcing a smile, though it felt like her insides were being ripped apart. We might go on a little trip, just the two of us. Emily looked at her, her eyes wide with hope. Like an adventure? Sarah smiled at her daughter's innocence, but there was no lightness in her own heart. This wasn't a trip. This was an escape. She stood, her heart heavy. Pack a bag, sweetheart. We're leaving soon. As Emily ran off to gather her things, Sarah stood still for a moment, her hand trembling as she reached for the phone. She needed to make a plan, figure out where to go, how to stay hidden. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself that leaving was the right choice, a voice in the back of her mind kept whispering, what if you're wrong? What if Daniel was lying to her? What if she was throwing away everything for nothing? But then another voice, one that was harder to ignore, answered back, You can't stay. You know too much now. And they won't stop until they silence you. With Emily's small suitcase in hand, Sarah grabbed a few essentials, her ID, some cash, and a credit card she had hidden away for emergencies. She took one last look around the apartment, as if trying to commit everything to memory. This had been her life, her world, for years. But now, that life was gone. She had to let it go. When Emily came back, her little suitcase packed, Sarah offered her a smile, though it felt like a mask. "We're ready," Emily said, looking up at her mother with wide eyes. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "Let's go, sweetie." They left the apartment, stepping into the cool night air. Sarah looked over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone following them, but the street was empty. Still, her nerves didn't settle. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Daniel's instructions had been clear. She was to meet him at a nondescript hotel on the outskirts of the city. The address was far enough away that she could slip out of town without anyone noticing, but she had no illusions that she was safe. There was no such thing as safety anymore, not for her, not for Emily. As they drove, Sarah's mind raced. The fear was still there, deep in her gut. But something else had begun to settle in too, resolve. She had been wrong to think that leaving was a choice between safety and chaos. Leaving now was about survival. And she would do whatever it took to protect Emily from the storm that was coming. But the deeper question lingered. Who could she trust? The truth was still out there, still waiting to be uncovered, and she had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. But she wasn't going to stop. Not now. Because now, more than ever, she knew that finding the truth was the only way to survive. The drive to the hotel felt like an eternity, each mile adding to the heaviness in Sarah's chest. The world outside the car window blurred as her mind cycled through the events of the past few days, each one more jarring than the last. The lies, the betrayal, and now, Daniel's cryptic warnings. She tried to calm her nerves by focusing on Emily in the back seat. Her daughter was quiet, her small body curled up with her head resting against the window, staring out at the passing lights. There was a peaceful innocence in her expression, and it broke Sarah's heart to think about the storm they were walking into. She could feel the weight of her choices bearing down on her. It was one thing to walk away from Alex, to take the first step into the unknown after everything had fallen apart. But it was another thing entirely to drag Emily into the middle of this chaos, to uproot their lives without any clear plan or understanding of what was happening. But there were no alternatives. Not anymore. The hotel Daniel had mentioned was a small, run-down building on the outskirts of town. Its neon sign buzzed faintly in the night air, casting a pale light on the empty parking lot. The kind of place that looked as if it belonged in a forgotten corner of a movie, a backdrop to an unfinished story. Sarah parked the car, her hands trembling slightly as she turned off the engine. "Mommy, are we here?" Emily asked, her voice soft but laced with curiosity. "We are," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. "Stay close, okay?" Emily nodded obediently, her eyes wide and trusting. Sarah took a deep breath before stepping out of the car and heading toward the entrance, her footsteps quick and measured. She had to stay calm. For Emily. For herself. Inside, the hotel lobby was dimly lit and quiet, the air thick with the scent of stale carpet and old furniture. The receptionist barely looked up when they walked in, his eyes glazed over as he typed away at a computer. Sarah approached the desk, but before she could speak, the man raised a hand. "Room 212, he muttered without looking at her. "He's expecting you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Room 212. Daniel had been waiting for them. She didn't ask any questions. She couldn't afford to. She just nodded, murmuring her thanks before heading toward the elevator with Emily in tow. The elevator creaked as it ascended, the tension between mother and daughter thickening with every floor they passed. It felt like they were moving through a dream, half-formed, blurry, and dangerous. When the elevator doors opened on the second floor, Sarah's pulse quickened. Room 212 was at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. The dim light from inside spilled out, casting long shadows across the hallway. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then she took a step forward, guiding Emily behind her. The air felt colder here, as if the walls themselves knew something they weren't willing to share. She knocked lightly on the door, her heart in her throat. There was no response at first, and just as she was about to knock again, the door creaked open fully. Daniel stood in the doorway, his face more tired than she remembered. His clothes were slightly disheveled, and his eyes looked older, weighed down by something Sarah couldn't quite place. "Come in," he said, his voice steady but somber. "We don't have much time." Sarah stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. It was sparse, the kind of place you wouldn't want to stay in for too long. Faded wallpaper, an old bed, a small table pushed against the wall. And sitting at the table was a man Sarah hadn't expected to see. Alex. Her breath caught in her throat. He was sitting there, his face pale, his eyes wide, as though he had been waiting for this moment to arrive. The man who had broken her heart, the man whose lies had torn apart everything she thought she knew, was sitting there like he hadn't just shattered her world. "Alex?" Sarah's voice came out in a whisper, a mix of shock and disbelief. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he just stared at her, his face full of regret and something else, something she couldn't read. For a moment, Sarah's mind swirled. What was going on? What was he doing here, and why had Daniel brought him into this? "Sarah, we need to talk," Alex said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Please, just listen." "I've listened to enough of your lies, Alex," Sarah snapped, stepping back. "I've heard enough. And now you're going to tell me the truth. All of it." He winced, but there was no denying the truth in her words. He knew that. They both knew it. "We don't have much time," Daniel interjected, his voice sharper now. "You need to understand what's happening before it's too late." What Alex didn't tell you, what he couldn't tell you, was that everything he got involved in, it wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just about you. Alex's head dropped, his eyes filled with shame. He didn't say anything at first, but his silence was enough. Sarah could feel her chest tightening, the weight of what Daniel was saying crashing over her in waves. Alex was involved with a group, Daniel continued. A powerful group with connections everywhere. They're not just interested in Alex anymore, they're interested in you now, Sarah. They know you're asking questions. And they won't stop until they have what they need. Sarah's head was spinning. What had Alex gotten himself into? What had they all gotten themselves into? She turned to Alex, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay strong. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning?" Alex's eyes welled up, his voice breaking. "I couldn't, Sarah. I thought I could protect you. But it was too late. By the time I realized how deep I was in, it was already too late to fix it. And now?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "What now? How do we fix this?" Daniel stood up, his hands braced on the table. "We don't fix it, Sarah. We survive it. The truth is, you're not going to get out of this unscathed. None of us are." A chill ran through her as she realized the full weight of the situation. There was no going back. The past few days had been leading to this moment, and now, standing in front of Alex, in this dingy hotel room, she understood that her life would never be the same again. She looked down at Emily, who was holding her hand tightly. "We need to go," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the chaos raging inside her. "We're leaving. No more lies." Alex and Daniel exchanged a glance, and for a moment it seemed like the world around them paused. But then, with a single nod, Alex stood up. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Sarah. But I need you to trust me. If we stay here, we're dead." Sarah didn't answer right away. She couldn't afford to trust anyone, not fully. But there was one thing she was certain of: the truth was out. and now she had to face it. She took Emily's hand and turned toward the door. The darkness outside beckoned, but it was also the only way forward. The truth was no longer a choice, it was a necessity. And no matter what it took, Sarah was ready to face whatever came next. But she wouldn't face it alone. The road ahead was uncertain, and the danger was real. But Sarah knew one thing with certainty: her fight had only just begun. And she would stop at nothing to uncover the rest of the truth. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?